Welcome to tonight's stream. This is a continuation of a collaboration between Tabletop by Night, the podcast, and Roving Dream Arts. We're going to continue this week with the vampire, the Caitiff vampire, and we'll be listening to that episode from Tabletop by Night in the background.
Welcome back to the table, friends. I am your humble host, Gray DMs, and with me, as always, is my co-host and co-conspirator, Owen.
Hi, I'm Owen.
You are listening to Tabletop by Night, a weekly podcast where we continue our exploration of Vampire the Masquerade. Tonight, we gather around the table to answer the question, you're already dead. How bad could things get?
Well, taking a wild guess that it can get pretty bad.
No, everything's perfect. Everything's fine. So as we round out the clans of the Camarilla and the Anarchs, we need to talk about those unfortunate and growing number who suffer a fate worse than becoming a vampire.
I mean, so like dead hooker? I don't know.
Hooker? That is the one you went to?
Yeah, I don't know. Dead hooker.
It's vampire. Dead hooker.
Dead hooker. That's
everything
right.
else.
Everything, yeah.
No, we're talking about those who the vampiric curse, even in its application, fails to provide the benefits that their other kindred brethren would receive.
Ooh.
Those that are so far removed from Cain, the progenitor, that the curse just can't quite do what it needs to do to give them the tools to live amongst the dead on a nightly basis. We're talking about Thin Bloods and Caitiff.
So, okay. You're saying that like they're not quite vampires?
Well, we'll get there. So let's talk about the vampires, the kindred.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Caitiff first.
Okay.
So throughout the history of the Camarilla, Caitiff, the term Caitiff has been used to designate two different types of kindred.
Okay.
So the traditional version of the Caitiff was people that were basically abandoned by their sire, so they never knew their clan.
Okay.
So this is where previously we've talked about a lot of Brujah Caitiff have existed throughout the years, because Brujah were kind of indiscriminately embracing.
And they just ran away.
And they ran away.
It's like, bit you, haha.
Exactly.
They just ran away.
So that childer, as you know, under those circumstances, has no real claim to their clan. If they're lucky enough to do some research and find their sire or figure out what, clan that they belong to, maybe they can petition to try to join up. The other Brujah probably don't care.
Right.
Especially worse if you're abandoned by something like a Ventru or a Toreador. Because then,
I mean, is that very common though for those particular clans to embrace someone and just ditch them?
So the Brujah, the gangrel, very common for them. The Toreador, sometimes if they're embraced and they basically have grown passé, they won't get embraced, or they won't get brought into formal kindred society.
Okay. Do they like hold on to them for a while and then they're just like, nah, never mind. I made a mistake.
I think that's what the Toreador would probably more likely do. That's why it's probably less, because at least there's the introduction into the clan in some way. But you got to remember, in the Camarilla, though, embrace is not free, right?
Right.
You have to petition the prince for it. So these are generally people that, for whatever reason, were embraced in such a way that they are not introduced into their clan society.
Okay, so kind of like outside the bounds of their rules, and we don't want them to find out, sort of thing.
Gotcha. I think the Camarilla often call them, the few episodes past where we talk about the outcast, right? Where they're not blood hunted, but they're also not given the privileges of being recognized as kindred. Right. So those are essentially like the traditional Caitiff. However, recently, a new type of Caitiff has been creative, and also going back a few centuries, where the embrace does not impart the clan specifics into the childer.
So they don't have distinguishing features, is what you're saying.
Right. Now, these are still full-fledged kindred, but without the bane, compulsion, or the inherent nature of disciplines that would normally be provided to a child.
So they're the base human if this was D&D.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
They have access to all disciplines at a much higher cost because they don't get that.
They don't lean towards any
clan benefit. And they're often looked upon with great suspicion and mistrust by their clan because they don't have the clan banes. Effectively, they're not flavored according to the clan. Well,
I like lemon.
So yeah, for a Nosferatu, for example, having a Caitiff childer might be a boon on the child, or like at the same time, the Nosferatu are not going to embrace you because they're not going to accept you into their culture because you don't suffer their derangements.
But at the same time, if you keep that bond, like specifically Nosferatu, if you keep that bond with the childer, that seems like that might be a bonus for the Nosferatu because it's like, oh, now I've got this informant that's not obviously a Nosferatu.
That is a good way to think about it. I would push back a little bit that relationship would probably be served better with something more like a ghoul that is controllable as opposed to a peer.
Okay.
At least the Nosferatu, because dealing with their Caitiff childer, what bond is the childer going to have to return to the sire, the Nosferatu sire?
Blood bond.
Oh, just straight up blood bonding them. But like once again, there's no difference between that and blood bonding any other vampire.
Right.
Like it is a very specific possibility. Like it's no doubt something that's probably happened and could happen, but like there's no systematic benefit to it.
Well, I see from a role play standpoint, it would be really good.
Yeah.
I think it would be really interesting because if you have a Nosferatu that has this vampire, this Caitiff, and say he just like, I'm going to go kidnap a Toreador, you're going to feed on a Toreador, you're going to get some Toreador blood in you, but you're still my child. Everybody else is going to think you're a Toreador, but you still work with me, and no one's going to have that clue that you come back to me, and that's my, part of my network.
Oh, absolutely.
That sort of thing. Like that, from a role play standpoint, that would be really fun. I kind of want to do that now.
Put that one on the list.
Yeah, I'll put that one on the list, the ever-growing list.
Yeah. No, like I said, the specifics, aside from systematic kind of reasons, it's a very interesting idea.
But in greater society, they're looked down upon. If anybody found out they were a Caitiff, that kind of spoils the whole what you were looking to do with them in the first place.
Right. And then Caitiff really only matter in positions where clan and lineage matter. So when you step away from the Camarilla, like the Anarchs probably don't really care that much.
No, you're just a vampire.
You're
just not a dirty thin blood.
We'll get there. Those dirty boys. But like also like you think of small communities probably pop up throughout the world that are filled with Caitiffs because they especially if a couple of them, like I said, Butcher Bruja or something, or like the fallout of a Sabbat raid or something causes like a couple kindred to be left over, not sure what happened, and they're all trying to form their own structure. That's kind of just like your everyday people.
Yeah.
And they're not going to know what a clan is or what the connection is, whether or not they show those traits at all. And they basically, they'll basically try to start their own society without those kind of like ancient ties or ancient rules that would control them.
Makes sense.
But to the clans that use essentially history and lineage as a form of control, they're almost anathema to them. Like a Ventru, who embraced a childer that ended up being a Caitiff, would go probably to extreme lengths to get rid of that childer.
Cover it up, yeah.
You're basically seeing a dilution of the power, the prestige, the curse that you're offering, and basically it's a form of vampiric impotence, really.
So does creating a modern day Caitiff, is that something that's more common with the higher generation vampires, or is that something that any vampire can do?
It is definitely more common with the higher generation vampires. I mean, there are ancient histories of vampires that were just abnormalities. Basically, there's an ancient kindred known as the Stone Man, who basically has a history about essentially being an ancient Caitiff, basically a Caitiff, almost Methuselah, like someone who was an abnormality, did not suffer the banes of their clan, struck out on their own and did their own kind of thing. But definitely far more often is it something that has happened more recently. Like during the late 1950s and basically post World War I and probably World War II, caitiffs were a lot more prevalent because now you had these big clashes between like the Sabbat and the Camarillo. You had the Sabbat Civil War. So you had basically also eventually groups of caitiff coming together and trying to kind of restart their own versions of society that was like away from the Camarillo, because they're like, hey, we don't have these ancient blood curses, right? Like we're kind of all equal here. We can kind of do these things. And of course, as anything unique, it must be stuffed out. Of the Camarillo. So
they're different. Get them.
Yeah. So caitiff, embraced normally by existing clans and bloodlines across the gamut of kindred existence. But basically something seems to happen between sire and child. Either certain defining traits are not passed along during the embrace, or some manner of imprinting is missing. And as a result, the child inherits none of the sire's clan disciplines or weaknesses. They often only inherit the most common disciplines. The lack of clan weakness is something which particularly galls the Nosferatu.
We want you to be ugly and disturbing.
Many different ways. Even in the curse of being a caitiff, it actually can be kind of like a freedom, as we've talked about it. But there's still many different ways back into the graces of the Camarillo. So by default, the Camarillo doesn't really accept any vampires that are 14th generation or higher, mainly because they can't really embrace, or they're guaranteed to have a failed embrace, but also because they're likely caitiff or definitely like gonna lean that way. But because they are full-fledged vampires, and because they basically have no restrictions on their potential to grow, they can diablerize, they can get new disciplines, they can grow old and powerful. So, I mean, they have all the potential of a normal vampire. Caitiff often end up finding themselves working their ways back into some sort of vampiric society, usually like working for an elder, becoming muscle, becoming the eyes or the ears out in the populace, like serving roles that will gain you a position of comfortability and renown.
Right.
And then, of course, through the dark ritual of Amaranth, I mean, like, hey, you can start looking like whatever you want eventually.
Yeah.
I guess it'd be hard for a caitiff to suddenly be like, hey, I'm a Nosferatu, but it's not hard to go round up the right disciplines and be like, I'm a Toreador.
Right.
I love beauty. Oh no, it's not beautiful. I can't.
You're strangely good at this. I just know all the tropes.
And then, of course, like we said, basically, caitiff are really probably super and most prevalent as you go through smaller populations. A vampire, whether they are caitiff or not, wandering out into the midst of Montana in some backwards town that can only support 3 or 4 vampires at most, they probably just don't care about clan lineage.
Yeah.
So a caitiff can be a local sheriff, or they could be a local prince, even if it matters,
Like nobody's really going there.
Yeah. So at that point, on the fringes of society, caitiff can kind of find themselves, accepted. But
it's kind of the Wild West out there for them.
True. And they're never in anybody's way. So It's not, no one's out basically hunting them usually, just because of their existence, which is a good segue to the other point.
The one step further down the rung.
So if we've seen nothing across all the different topics that we've discussed as far as patterns go, other than this, we've definitely seen the concept in vampire that embracing passes the curse to the next generation in a slightly weaker form. Your elders are more powerful. They are more righteous, everything about, depending on your viewpoint, they are more worthy or holy or sacred or dangerous or evil. They are more important than you are.
Right.
They hold power both literally and figuratively. In the Camarillo, they hold political power almost absolutely. And everywhere else, they at least hold it by force.
Right.
So what happens when you go from generation to generation to generation, distilling this power and lessening it and passing pieces of it down? Effectively, you have to come to a dead end somewhere. And that dead end is the thin blood.
The LaCroix of vampires.
Very much so. Like, oh man, so what did you do? Well, back in my day, we used to have a bunch of drinks with a whole bunch of calories and a lot of booze in them. So what'd you do? Well, we got rid of the calories and the taste. Then we got rid of the booze, and then we just water and seltzer.
We have water that one time rode in the same truck as a piece of fruit.
Yes, much like LaCroix is the thin blood of soda. Or beer or any other righteous drink.
Man, that's what we should come up with, like a list, like what soda is which, defines which clan.
Oh, venture straight up Coke.
Yeah,
because the Coca-Cola company has done horrible things, like ensuring that their lineage. They claim to be the oldest, the most historic. They claim the name, like they're 100% Coke.
They have a lot of secrets. Like they're what was in the formula back in the day? Coke. We don't know.
100%.
They coveted another company to the point that they tried to copy them, and then they had to go back on it.
It's 100%. Like the history of Coca-Cola is the history of the venture. Okay, I will find it. That is a point that needs no discussion. I would say the La Sombra is Pepsi.
Okay,
because it is the rival to Coke.
Yeah,
and people who like Pepsi are kind of religiously fanatical about it. Right. Like, we're not Coke drinkers. Like, fuck Coke drinkers. Like, but like everybody else is like, it's not better. Mm-hmm. It's okay. It's a little more citrus, you know, but Pepsi's like, yeah, we started this whole alternate revolution thing of the Pepsi products.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like La Sombra really fits into, and then you got to get with like the Toreador, the artsy stuff. They got to be like, Mr. Pibb or Dr. Pepper.
They would be like some fancy brand, like not part of Coke. Like they would be like
RC Cola.
No, RC Cola's too. I don't want to say not mainstream, because I think hipsters fit in with Toreador pretty good too. But it's like there's some kind of boutique, you know,
Jones.
Yeah, they're like bottle. Jones soda. Yeah,
like, we got come in all these different flavors.
Yeah, really
selling a bottle.
Yeah, it's like these. You know, we're different. You know, but
like they're probably owned by Coke.
Yeah, and it's just like, you know, we've got all these different things, but they're all just the same flavors everybody else has, just slightly different. You know, but it's just like, look how pretty we are.
Ooh, so then so Tremere,
root beer.
That's what I was about to say. It was like Dr. Pepper, Mr. Pibb, root beer. It has to be something that's not. It's like a step away from cola. Yeah. It's like, this is a thing that has a different flavor.
Right. Because they're not, if you look at their history, they are vampires, but they didn't start out as vampires.
Yeah.
It's like root beer was originally sarsaparilla, and it was not really a soda. It most don't have caffeine in them, you know, so it's kind of like its own thing a little bit.
It's a good call. All right. So now we go to what is like the Bruja and Gangrel.
So Gangrel, I originally was going to say Mountain Dew, but I think they're Jolt or Surge.
Yeah, like I think Gangrel is like every form of, it's the stuff you drink when you're sick.
Oh, ginger ale?
Every form, because it's like the hippie drink, but at the same time, it's like every form of ginger ale that's out there.
See, ginger ale just makes me think old.
Yeah, but that's why they like Gangrel are all like old. Yeah. Okay, maybe not. I think Bruja is straight up Mountain Dew, because fuck you.
Yeah.
That's the whole like, we're Bruja. We come in 2 flavors. We're Entropy or Baja Blast, you know?
It's just too much sugar. You'll take it and you like it.
We have opinions about stuff, and you're gonna drink this shit in your teeth.
Oh god!
Like a Bruja is totally the guy that would go to court and go, you know what? Fuck you, Your Honor. That woman claims that there was a mouse in the soda. We proved that mouse would dissolve in our soda, so we can get it and die.
No, I feel like going with the examples we have so far. Bruja are Budweiser. But that's not soda at all. I know it's not soda at all, but it's like the scummy, you know, like the.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. So I think Bruja is like the energy drink.
Yeah.
Where they're like, I'm trying really hard not to do that. I think like Anarchs are like your Fago and you're like, you know, they're like, they have the same lineup and they're like, hey, we're just as good.
This all just tastes a little bit different.
But no one really wants to try.
But we have rock and rye.
And you're like, eh.
Nosferatu. What are Nosferatu?
So I was trying to get there. I was like, what is the dirty, but like you want it and you can't not have it in the fountain?
Right. I feel, you know what? Nosferatu are the pick your own flavor pop dispensers. The ones where like you can get any flavor you want and you kind of like mix it with cherry and stuff like that. But it's like the thing where it's just like, yeah, I'll have a little bit of Coke and I'll get like some Dr. Pepper and put that in there too. And I'll mix some Sprite in with it. You know, it's like there are a lot of things and it's like, it looks disgusting, but when you get it just right and you drink it, like it tastes good.
Maybe. Yeah. We'll circle back on that one. I want to try to keep the metaphor more sharp.
Okay.
All right. Malkavians.
Malkavian.
All the fruity ones.
Yeah.
Like Crush, like anything that's some weird fruity thing, because you never know what it is.
I feel like Malkavians are they're the boutique brands
Purple drink
that have like fruit flavors you wouldn't expect in a pop, like dragon fruit. And,
but yeah, because I think like the basic Malkavians that are trying to like play with the others are like Sunkist. They're like, hey man, we're a soda too. And then like behind them is 13 different flavors of fruits that you don't even know what the hell they do. And they're just wow.
Who's that guy? That's me too.
Okay, so we got Malkavians. Okay. So now let's see, what are we missing? We got, I mean, if we're going this example, like Thin Bloods is the LaCroix. It's just the plethora of all the different freaking like flavored waters that have appeared. Caitiff is literally the off-brand, you know, that they have to
they're like the dollar store.
Yeah, like the one that just doesn't like, you're like, you peel off the label and it's got another label underneath it that doesn't make sense. We're like the Setites and the Assamites. One of them, like the Assamites are probably the ginger ale. Because there's people in a different country who love everything about them, but then like, we're like, yeah, I only drink that stuff when I'm sick. You know, they're like something like that. Like they're like the weird ginger beer thing that like people swear like, oh man, in my home country I love this stuff, and everybody's like, I don't know about that, it's an acquired taste.
I feel like Setites are White Claw.
That's expensive, like Four Loko.
Yeah.
Setites are there to make sure everything gets worse.
Exactly. They're White Claw. So it's just like, oh, it's not great, but like I can drink a lot of these and then
I took
everything
your
goes
flavor
wrong.
away and I left all the bad things in it.
Yeah,
okay. That's a perfect, It takes a while to understand it, but you're like, no, that's definitely a Setite thing. It's just like, you're not going to enjoy this process, but you're going to get screwed up and you're going to pay too much for it and you're going to like do something wrong.
And in the morning, you're going to have a horrible hangover after you realize what's happened.
I just think we did it. I think that's pretty much all of them. We go back to the Malkavian or the Nosferatu. What is the dirty?
Yeah.
The Nosferatu are like the heart and soul of the underbelly of the Camarilla. What's like the soda that you give to kids? Parents don't want it.
RC Cola.
Maybe it's something like that. It's
something Mr. Pibb.
Yeah, it's like the weird. It's like Nosferatu are like the Dr. Pepper, Mr. Pibb, where you're like, you're not really root beer, okay? Don't have enough flavor for that. Ironically, a lot of people do like you, and you're a robust thing. You have to show up here. But like none of the name brands are going to make, like they don't want their label like next to your label.
And they're not making rip-off versions because no one really drinks.
It's like, no, but anybody who showed up to the table as a kid was just like, I love RC Cola. It's just like, you're a weird kid. You know, and the kid would be like, yeah, well, I'm going to burn everybody's house down one of these days. All right. Okay. I think there we go.
Okay.
There's our pantheon of like soda clans right there. Get to it. That's the whole thing. Is like the Salubri are like, they're like the Jolt. Like it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Whatever, and you just hear good things about it, but it's not there. All right. Okay. Back to
off tangent.
Where were we? Thin Bloods. Oh,
yeah, we were talking about
started
the LaCroix of vampires. Remember
the LaCroix of
That's
vampires.
what brought this whole thing on.
So you haven't figured it out. Thin Bloods are basically the point where not only does the vampirism not pass down clan traits, but even some of the traits of vampirism itself are lost.
Mm-hmm.
Thin Bloods inherently don't have the ability to sire another childer.
Mm-hmm.
Some Thin Bloods can not even drink properly.
Yeah,
Baby teeth.
they don't. Yeah, they don't even have fangs.
Some Thin Bloods are so far removed from the gift of Cain that they can walk amongst the sun.
So, I mean, at that point, what really makes them a vampire?
So essentially, they do have a beast within them. They do have the beast fighting for their soul. The question is that has the beast taken the half of the part of their soul and basically resides inside of it, or is it still in the process of doing so? They do need, they don't, not all Thin Bloods have to have blood to survive. Some of them can eat and drink like normal, but they will have the hunger for blood, and it will drive them like a normal vampire towards feeding. They need to. The more they drink, the more they start kind of leaning in towards the vampiric side.
Mm-hmm.
Their humanity directly plays a role in how bad the curse affects them.
Okay.
So in theory, you may have heard that for a Thin Blood who does not partake of the blood as much as they can afford to. So they basically always put themselves into like the very like edges of starvation and blood wise. They keep their humanity very high by basically keeping touchstones nearby and essentially trying to live as a human. And if they get lucky enough to manage that and hold on to their sanity, there might be a path back to humanity for them. This is something that the vampires have no chance of. And thus, this makes Thin Blood not only like pariahs, but like heretics, essentially. Like this is...
They can do something I can't do.
Exactly. Mixed in with that is that Thin Bloods, their condition, being unable to learn any disciplines. They cannot call upon the power of blood like normal vampires do.
Well, they can't even blood buff, huh?
I think... they might be able to do that.
Okay.
I think that's a mechanic thing, depending on which rule you're looking at. But they can't use the normal disciplines. They can, however, they have found ways to get past this. So they have come up with something called Thin Blood alchemy.
Oh, that sounds cool.
They're also heavily influenced and tied to the resonance of the blood they feed on, which is the emotional like spectrum that the person was going through when they fed.
So is this kind of a thing that like a normal vampire is just so intent on consuming the blood, they just don't notice this thing that the Thin Bloods are kind of focusing on?
No, definitely not. It's more like, imagine a person who like would go to their favorite Mexican restaurant or something and get spicy food. And they're like, oh man, I love spicy food. And then you take a person whose constitution is so weak that they're like, this is going to kill me. So Thin Bloods are like affected by the resonance.
Gotcha.
Like if they partake of blood, with a strong kind of essentially emotional flavor to it. Whereas vampires are very much like, ooh, this is the good stuff. I like this stuff. And vampires will definitely try to feed to it, but that still is a process of the vampire trying to connect to a piece of humanity, even if they're stealing it.
Right.
And the Thin Bloods have that piece of humanity in it.
So it's just amplified.
Yeah. So we'll get to the blood alchemy, the Thin Blood alchemy in a second, but really the last thing that the Thin Bloods have, and a curse that's kind of upon them, is that in many different mythos, in many different traditions, they are seen as heralds of the end of the world.
How does that work?
So many different stories lead to basically the conclusion that when the curse of Cain is spread so far that it does not even stick anymore, that is when essentially the elders will rise up and start cleansing the world, which is Gehenna. Now, there are a bunch of different scenarios, the ways that this can happen, and books were released that detailed many of them. Fundamentally, the whole world of Vampire the Masquerade had a Gehenna ending. Where Cain rose up and all this crazy stuff happened that gave birth to the creation of Vampire Requiem. That was kind of like how that cycle went out. Since then, there have been many alternatives to that. But basically in 5th edition and the mythos or the history that we're talking about, that didn't really happen.
Isn't it like on the verge of happening? Isn't that the fear that it's ramping up?
Kind of. Instead, something else happened. Like all the signs were there that this was happening. But what happening instead was the beckoning.
Right.
So instead of Gehenna, the beckoning was basically all the elder vampires were being called to be pulled to the Middle East to basically wage a jihad, basically wage a war against the like antediluvians and the forces of something that was coming. This was not known to them why they were doing this. Many could fight it and could basically, desperately try to hold on and not go because it's effectively, even though they were elders, they were just basically going to run into more elders.
Right.
And the Sabbat basically thought, hey, this sounds like a party line and we're all headed there. So they basically dove in and waged war. In the current version of the history, from what I understand, like that is coming to an end or has recently come to an end because that's when essentially they're getting around to writing the rest of the books.
Gotcha.
That was used as a way to take like 3/4 of the stuff off the table.
Right.
But it was also a good way, and it was a good thing about keeping basically elders out of your story.
Right.
And then having elders show back up like, hey, I just went on the 15th crusade and now I'm back,
You kind of move everything towards the middle so everybody's not like, oh shit, I have all these super overpowered people that I have to deal with. And so it's like, these are people that are stronger than me, but like with some, ingenuity, I can take them.
Yeah, like a 4th generation living in a bar in Chicago.
Yeah. Just, what do you do about
game?
that?
Yeah, there's just nothing you can do about this.
Ma'am, I'd like to ask you to leave. No.
Okay, I tried. I'm going to go sit back down. So, being that Thin Bloods are often cited as the herald of these things, basically the coming of Thin Bloods is what leads us to basically start happening, or the Duskborn too. That's what they're called. They actually kind of serve a place in that many of them have this weird future sight or far sight thing where they see flashes of the Holy War. Where they start seeing images of ancient Methuselah waking up and taking to battle. Yeah. Maybe that they're just they are the waters of the curse lapping at the edge of the pond. So the big ripples show up in them more like easily. There could be a bunch of different reasons why this happens, but basically because they basically have this kind of access occasionally. Essentially, anybody who's established as a vampire generally wants to get rid of them because they don't want that information being spread. They don't want panic or usefulness of the information to get out. They don't even want the Thin Bloods to be a sign of this. So for multiple reasons, both as a representation of what vampires can have, as a representation of their failure, as a representation of possibly the end of the world, or just simply as more bodies to feed, most vampiric societies want to get rid of them.
Right.
So they are often hunted. They are often gathered up and culled. They're often...
I wonder what that's like.
You wouldn't have any players who would have experience with a bunch of Thin Bloods.
Oh, God.
But generally, they are going to be the 14th generation and the 15th generation vampires. So, what can Thin Blood do that normal vampires can't, however? Well, because people are crafty, and when you give people supernatural abilities, they're going to be crafty too. Thin Bloods have found a form of alchemy.
Okay, how does that work? And how can a Tremere figure this out?
By capturing some Thin Bloods. That's the easiest way to do it.
I know, but someone took my supply.
So Thin Blood alchemy is basically a 2-step practice. One is distillation of the blood, basically using various formula practices. And basically the second part is activation or channeling of its power. So essentially you need to prepare the blood in various ways, and then you need to basically find a way to use the blood. So preparing the blood generally comes down to one of 3 methods. One is basically the Thin Blood alchemist uses their own body as essentially the alchemical furnace.
Oh, okay.
So this is kind of imagine a guy who's basically sampling all the different brews and then throwing something back up, or basically sticking a pipe in himself and pulling his own blood out. Yeah. Vampire gets weird.
No, I'm just thinking about the Florida game and how fun that would be.
Yeah. The second one is someone who basically does that, but they don't get their hands dirty, so they do it to a mortal.
Oh,
yeah.
That's creepy.
Yeah. So not only does that have the benefit of basically having that one level of abstraction, and if you lose your blood supply, well, it's just a mortal gone instead of you. But also, mortals can taint the blood with a resonance. So if you want to, like, oh, this needs a little more fear, you'd be like, haha, I'm going to rip off your freaking face.
Right.
And, like, that mortal will start panicking, and, like, that will start resonating in the blood. Resonance is also something that usually takes time. So just scaring them. But, like, scaring them once doesn't exactly, like,
you have to do it over time. So you're basically torturing them.
Yeah, that's entirely. I mean, the whole plot of, like, all the Saw movies could be, like, just vampires who want a very specific type of blood.
There's a fun game for you.
Here's the thing. I got a bunch of guys on the line who really want this particular set of resonance and humor, So the last one is where actually the blood is distilled in, like, an alchemical meth lab kind of concoction, where basically they have instruments and do things. This one basically has the benefit of that you don't really need to keep bodies and stuff on hand, but usually it just basically doesn't give you the most potent version of the process, although probably the most stable. So,
you just need to find that Heisenberg.
It's a brilliant vampire character right there. Just like,
bitch.
I'm just like, what were you? Well, I was a high school hermatologist.
I was a high school hematologist.
Hematologist. There you go.
Is there a big draw for that in high school?
Florida's a really weird place. So, what kind of things could a thin blood do with the right mixture of bloods? Well, thin blood alchemy also kind of works like a discipline in that basically as you level it, you gain essentially recipes. And those recipes allow you to do certain things.
It's time to cook.
Basically. I mean, that's a very strong comparison as to, like, yeah, that's a Breaking Bad is a very good comparison to basically the kind of seedy life that thin bloods could have. But right off the bat, thin blood alchemy gives you a lesser form of telekinesis.
Oh.
It allows your body to become pliable, so it's very hard for someone to basically bind you or handcuff you or lock you up.
You become one of those people that can, like, bend themselves in half.
Basically. It allows you to basically create a field of mist as an easy way out. I think that was one actually you guys experienced. And also, it basically allows you to create a vampiric form of sunscreen that doesn't work that well with normal vampires, but for thin bloods seems to do the trick.
Yeah.
So eventually, as you get stronger, you start getting the ability to actually counterfeit disciplines. So you can start going through the discipline pool, and if you can figure out how to get the right blood, you could basically give a potion, essentially a draft, a beer bottle filled with blood that when you drink it gives you, like, potence 2 or 3, all the way up to 4.
Wow. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. You can also do things like they have examples, but there's one called Red's Flaming Hot Sauce, which basically actually sets your blood on fire, like Greek fire. So, like, your blood becomes like this air ignited flammable substance. There's also things basically that they've built to make them safer. So there's specific anti-kindred things, like they can basically make a draft that will make vampires who taste it go asleep, like fall into torpor. They can basically make stuff that will actually kind of cast a form of glamour on the vampires so that the vampire will be inclined to believe them. They also have a substance called ash, which basically temporarily improves the thin blood's blood potency to become a vampire.
Oh, that's kind of
so
neat.
They can kind of fake it or at least get access to the stuff for a little bit of time. However, it's very addicting.
Oh,
because the power is addicting.
Man, characters just really coming together in my head right now.
Together. Basically, they can.
This ash is so clear.
They can also make stuff that'll basically distill a vampire's memories into a bottle so that they can drink and, like, see what they saw. They basically have a draft that allows the user to trap and store sunlight in their body and unleash it on a target when they touch them.
This is Vampire Fireball.
Just saying, that seems like a nuclear option.
Yes, it really does.
Of course, they also have an ability that allows the user to stop time.
Okay, so all those other ones leading up to the sunlight, I was just like, wow, that's pretty powerful. And then all of a sudden, yeah, that one seems out of place.
Dude, that's level 3.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I know. Like, that's before they even start getting into, like, counterfeit level 3 disciplines. The user can fly. The user gains access to one of the deceased vampire's disciplines. Creates poison that once imbibed by the victim, they cannot slake their hunger for one night. That's a good tool that it's not stopping time.
I know. I mean, what's the description of it, or does it just say stopping time?
This version, I have to actually go into the source book to read that. I'm guessing it's basically some form of celerity, where like you just
move very fast. Yeah,
and then like one of the big things that they can do is they can actually make up a draft that will wake a vampire from torpor.
Ooh,
and that's one of those things that elder vampires might be hunting a thin blood down for. Like, I need you to do a specific thing, and then I'm going to promise you that you get to survive, but you will not. You know,
I just need you to go in here, pour this down this corpse's throat, and then, well, you'll see.
So the question really, with all this knowledge of how weird and wonderful and horrible being a thin blood would be, one of the discussion points we talked about was what role do they serve in the story that you're telling in Vampire the Masquerade? Right? So, yeah, Thin Bloods and Caitiff. And obviously the first part is just they're going to be background characters, like riffraff, because if you need just like the vampiric equivalent of 5 goblins on the street, like a couple Thin Blood, that could be making sense. But
I mean, they can also just be the dregs of, society, if you just really need to kind of show off how evil a particular group might be, you can just really show them terrorizing or torturing or whatever it is that they do to Thin Bloods.
Yeah. I think one of the good kind of points from a storytelling perspective is thinking that Thin Bloods probably function much the way the Anarchs do, but on a different timetable. Because they're still attached to their human lives, so they're still thinking like the nightly basis, the weekly basis, the monthly basis. Anarchs might have a few that's hundreds of years old, but they're like, it's a ceasefire, but it's been a ceasefire for 50 years.
Right.
Thin Bloods are not going to understand that timetable because they were newly created.
Right.
So if you want to amp up like the struggles, Thin Bloods are a good source to draw your players' attention and then basically pull back eventually and understand that like the Anarchs
and murder.
Yeah. Just wipe them all out horribly. Convince all of them that it'd be a great idea to go attack Elysium.
Specifically, you have one character base his entire persona aiding these down and out people and then murder them in a brutal, horrific way and leave that on his shoulders. And not only leave it on his shoulders, but have the people come to him and not realize he's the reason.
Oh my gosh. That was the greatest moment. So for most of you who are listening, I guess a couple of you will have known this story, but one of our characters in a campaign basically decided that the Thin Blood disenfranchised like group really fit the heart and soul of what their character was feeling.
Because he was a caitiff.
Yeah. So he was just like, hey man, you guys don't like me. I'm going to go join the people that you don't like. And he got a little too brouhaha-ish and was spouting out some stuff and was getting them all riled up. And he had the burden of the knowledge of how the city worked.
Right.
When the Thin Bloods didn't. They didn't understand where to go protest and where to. So he presented it as like, well, if you want to go occupy Wall Street, you should go down to the Elysium where all the head vampires are hanging out.
So like 10 or 12 of us should be enough, right?
And they met the sheriff and they threw a Molotov cocktail at him. And he decided that was his project for the night, was making sure they were all gone. And as much as that was interesting, the best part was when one of them, clearly understanding how badly they had screwed up, found that character. It was like, please help us. And he was like, sure, buddy.
Yeah, I'm helping.
Oh, look, I found another one of them.
Go to sleep.
That was such a good flip flop. But yeah, so that's
and then boy, I should go back to them and tell them this was the wrong idea. Where did they all go? Someone called the Anarchs.
Oh, that's right. They showed up. The Anarchs like, we don't like him either. I like these Anarch guys, though. He kind of flipped them.
Yeah, he flipped real quick on that one.
But it was... Yeah, so I mean, Thin Bloods have been around for a while. As far as I understand it, they were part of the older game, and they were a lead up to the events of Gehenna and stuff. So they were more of like a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen references that you could buy the merit Thin Blooded, which like kind of changed the way things work. Like you'd have to pay double for disciplines and stuff. I don't remember exactly what it got you, unless you just wanted to play on hard mode. But like they were in the game Vampire the Bloodline 2, which was like one of our first introductions to it. In fact, one of the versions of Vampire the Bloodlines 2, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2.
Tack a couple more words on there.
So one of the original versions where they were like pitching that game, they were showing us stuff was the concept, and I don't know if this will make it into the final cut, where you start as a Thin Blood, and then depending on your path, you will find a vampire to diablerize, and then you will become that clan. So that is a thing that can happen. There are ways the books kind of allude to that a Thin Blood could become a proper, basic caitiff. Really, I mean, I guess you could, under the right circumstances, become a member of a clan. I know that if you're going to allow your players to be Thin-Blooded, you probably want to keep that option on the table. That's got to be like kind of a little carrot on a stick dangling. Otherwise, all of them will be like, well, I don't really want to drink blood, and I'm a baby teeth, and I'm just going to drink blood blags.
Hey, you know what? I don't want to drink blood either, and I'm going to have baby teeth as well.
Not poking anybody out in particular, but...
I don't know. I kind of feel that if Thin Bloods are an option, the whole table should probably be Thin Bloods.
Yeah, I think it's I think a group of non-Thin Blood, non-Caitiff vampires being all embraced at the same time in modern day telling, even though that feels like the place that you'd start your story from, probably is also a little unrealistic. Especially if you're telling a Camarilla tale, that means that you have a bunch of lower generation vampires that all earned the right to do it.
Right.
Also, you pretty much have to be like 13th generation or lower to avoid the like almost inevitable becoming a Thin Blood. I think the Tremere was 13th, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I think that his sire was only 12.
Yeah, I know. With the position that she was in, we kind of had to do it that way. He couldn't start too strong.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, maybe that's a story point. Maybe he finds out she's not actually his sire.
Ooh. Yeah, or there's just other shenanigans going on there. Some interesting things. I had some ideas, but we'll see if we get to them. Yeah. Anyway. But yeah, like playing a group of established vampires probably is like the default. It's the vanilla. But going through the process of like being introduced to the setting as Thin Blood will definitely give the vampires or the players probably a better understanding or respect for how horrible, powerful a vampire is. And like when they step into that role of kind of taking an ownership of it, as opposed to, they're not going to be the everyman.
Right.
And Thin Bloods kind of are the everyman, and the horrible everyman being hunted by things that eat them.
Every man hates me.
So one of the kind of fears that we put into the game that I kind of like as we're talking about ideas too is that another reason vampires kind of would hate Thin Bloods specifically is that Thin Bloods have the potential of becoming full-fledged vampires. And to do so, one of the avenues is to diablerize a vampire. So not only are they, capable of diablerie like a normal vampire would, but like it's a pretty strong incentivized.
Right. You run into a group of them and you're immediately on edge because you're just like, oh shit, is this a trap?
And because maybe that group might get one of them to be, essentially full-fledged and start doing political maneuvers for the rest of the group. And because they have people, they have like the numbers on you, because they have the little bit of power, and because you don't understand what they can do. It's a reason to be cautious, or just go in there with the hounds and the sheriff and clean house.
I would have liked it if the situation in our game turned into something like that, where he walked in expecting to find kindred spirits, and instead he found people that were out to get him. because they knew what he was.
Well, that was one of the things was like someone told him too, is like, don't tell any of the other people here that you're.
Okay. See,
yeah, that was one of the part, because I think the doctor, when he was talking to the doctor was like, you're Caitiff. You're not one of us. And he's like, what? And he's just like, don't tell anybody else that. It's like, you have the ability to walk in both worlds right now, and like that might be taken from you. Because I did bring that up, but like, yeah, it was
quickly forgotten.
Yeah. We all dearly love that player, but sometimes they fixate.
Yeah.
And then interesting things happen. Well, yeah, I think we basically dived the depths of the shallow end of the pool.
Okay. Plumb the depths of the shallow end. We've gone down 1 foot.
We've splashed all around the edge of the pool of canine blood, and now
we're at the Magikarp end of the pool.
Yes.
We just use splash.
Magikarp uses splash. So I guess we're going to leave it there. This is we hope that you understand the role or the possible roles that these characters can serve now in your storytelling. We hope that you too understand why you should get rid of them at all costs and burn them to the ground.
Or, I don't know, eviscerate the proletariat.
Rise up. Take to the streets.
Assume the means of production.
Those sound like Bruja words. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.